All right. Well, hey, welcome back, everyone. Uh, Thanks for joining us again. This week, I had a question for Pastor Vinny, and this came to me just the other day, and I was like, man, I'd like to ask Pastor Vinny this question, and I think there's others in our congregation that might be interested in this as well. If you don't know, Pastor Vinny is a licensed counselor in the state of Massachusetts, and you know, sort of like being called to the ministry. I don't think anybody just wakes up one day and says, you know what, I think I want to be a counselor. It's something that you feel called to as a vocation. You feel like it's something that you must do. And so I wondered, Vinny, what is it that made you feel called to pursue counseling as a vocation? What are some things that happened in your life that made you say, hey, I think this might be what God's calling me to do? Can you share that with us?
Sure. I'm thinking about in high school, I remember picking up a book off the shelves of our school library, and it was a book about spirit-filled temperament and just the idea that there are different temperament types and all that. And I found that intriguing, and I guess I should have known back then in high school that that's where things were headed, but I don't think I really picked up on that. But then in college, I remember finding myself trying to help this girl who was suicidal, and that's actually one of the ways that I, met my wife. Was through trying to help someone else. And so I guess there were some clues back then, but it wasn't until my third ministry job as a pastor. I was co-pastoring a church with someone, and that pastor said, I wish somebody here could counsel people. He said, because I'm no good at it. I could tell you what's wrong with them and tell them, what they need to do to straighten things out, but I don't have the patience, to work with them week after week after week to make that happen. And at that time, I wanted to do a second master's degree. I had a master's in ministry, and I wanted to do a second master's. So I went to the community college, and I grabbed a bunch of degree brochures. And it turns out I threw all of them out except counseling and psychology. And I set it on my desk. And then I took a trip to Florida, and I hadn't been to Florida since I graduated college. And I met one of my college mentors there and was speaking with him. And I shared with him some experiences, things I experienced over the last 4 years. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, Vinny, you are not supposed to be a pastor. You're supposed to be a counselor. And I remember him saying that, and I'll never forget him saying that, because I was like, the last 4 or 5 years has all about been me preparing for the ministry and then being in ministry. So it's been maybe 4 or 5 years preparing and then 4 or 5 years actually trying to be a pastor. And for him to tell me that this thing that I had prepared for all this time, I wasn't supposed to be, that was pretty jarring. But I remember when he said that, and I told him, I said, that's really interesting because I have all these brochures from the community college. I threw all them out except for the one on counseling psychology. So it turns out I did the master's degree there, which enabled me to get licensed, and also did a PhD in biblical counseling, because that's really, as a pastor, what I wanted to know about more than anything. So I have been a licensed counselor for over 10 years now, and I've been mostly doing counseling on my day off from my church work. So that day happens to be my busiest day, where I spend time with like 8 or 9 people on that day. But in the last couple of years, I have had time to increase my counseling hours, and here in this last year I've been able to do that, and so I'm working less hours for the church and more hours in the counseling ministry, and in January 2021 I'll be full-time counseling. So it's really been since 1999, where this first began, where that mentor kind of pointed me in the right direction, so to speak. It's been a consistent unfolding of God's plan for my life in terms of counseling. And I'd say right now I'm really mostly interested in 3 areas. One is pre-marriage, and the reason for that is because I didn't get a lot of pre-marriage counseling before I was married. I did get some, and it was helpful, that some that I got, but I really have a passion to come alongside couples who need to prepare for marriage well. And then grief is another area I'm interested in. I lost my mother and my stepfather before my 11th birthday, and that certainly was a defining moment in my life, especially having come into a relationship with Christ as a result of what I I experienced and turning to him during that time. So that's another group of people that I've been working with more and more over the last 5 years. And then more recently in the last year or so is doing trauma work with people and working with people who have experienced trauma, because again, I experienced some trauma in the violent deaths of my mother and my stepfather. So I guess, that feeling called has been getting stronger every year, and it's because it's sort of like having a telescope and it kind of being fuzzy at first, but then getting more clear as you kind of dial it in.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I don't think I always knew all those details, but so one question that another question that comes to mind is, let's say somebody's watching this and maybe it's a college student. Maybe they just graduated from college. Say they're 20, 22 years old,
Mm-hmm.
but they're feeling drawn to that. Um, any advice for them about how to go forward and prepare? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was, I'd say one step at a time. It's like, what is trying to sense what the Lord has in front of you. Like, because if you would have told me all the things that I've experienced in the last, 20 so years, I would have been pretty surprised if you would have told me that up front. But for me, what I needed to do was I needed to get that degree, and then I
Yeah.
needed to get licensed, and then so I needed to take little steps along the way in order to get where I am today. And it's clear that the things that I'm doing, God has called me to do, and has and I've gotten the skills over the last 20 years to do the things that I'm doing today, and I'm still getting even further training because,
Right.
and for instance, working with people who have dealt with trauma is not it's not easy work. So I would just say, if someone's feeling interested in this, I'd say talk to somebody who's kind of been ahead of you on this and tell them what you're thinking, tell them and get some perspective from them. They might be able to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I one of the things I've learned in my life is that mentorship, like you just said, somebody that's one
Yeah.
step ahead of you is always so important because they can speak into your life and they've got that information, that knowledge. And they can say, here's what you might want to do. Here's some difficulties, but also here's some of the blessings that come along with it that you can look
Mm-hmm.
forward to. So, yeah, well, I hope, last week we talked about some counseling books that have been influential in your life. And so we just wanted to kind of follow that up with, those who may be tuning in, who feel called but wondering, man, what should I do next? They could take some insights from this. So thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. And again, we'll have conversations about this more in the future.
You're
So
welcome. Well,
yeah,
next week will we hear from you about how you felt called to pastoral ministry?
yeah, sure, we can do that. We'll do that.
All right.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye.